What is it about Nintendo and the number 3? Specifically when it comes to their games. I mean, Mario 3, classic. Super Metroid, it's technically Metroid 3, classic. Contra 3, I know that's not specifically Nintendo, but Final Fantasy 3, alright, another caveat, that's technically 6. Link to the Past, classic. It's not lost on me that many of these are on the Super Nintendo. Something about that 16-bit era was just magical. We could sit here all day and list the great 3s that came out on the Super Nintendo, and I'm sure that would have been a pretty good time, but we're here to talk specifically about the next Zelda in the series, Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Ditching the side-scrolling action from Zelda 2 and really redefining and enhancing the gameplay from the original Zelda, we wound up with this masterclass in top-down action and exploration. And what an overhaul achievement this game is. The growing pains from the NES days are gone. This style of Zelda game would continue to be the base for years to come, and in fact it's still used even now. Link's Awakening is a super modern example. Even removed from Nintendo specifically, so many game developers who grew up with this game use it to some degree as inspiration. The most recent one that comes to mind for me is Tunic, a great example. While not 100% spot on, you can't deny the nod to this style of Zelda. And who could forget the early 2000s and the online game Grawl? Y'all remember Grawl, right? No? Just me, huh? Well, that's probably for the best, I think. And if you do, for some reason, remember that game, let me know. At any rate, how's it going, everybody? My name's Leon, and I want to welcome you all back to the Zelda Retrospective. Releasing in 1991 in Japan and in 1992 in the US and the EU, The Legend of Zelda: Triforce of the Gods, or Link to the Past as we know it, began as a much different project than what we really wound up with at the end. This game has the familiar faces, Miyamoto, Tezuka, Tanabe, Kondo, each filling the roles that they are primarily known for. Producer, director, writer, art, and music. It all came together on this project. Originally, the game's production began as early as 1988 and was slated to be just another Nintendo Entertainment System game. But those plans changed about a year after the development began, and in 1989, it was swapped over to the upcoming Super Nintendo. In the early phases, the team wanted it to take on a more almost Final Fantasy, or really, rather a Secret of Mana approach. That is to say, they wanted a main protagonist that had a party of friends to help along the way. Party would have been an elf fighter, some kind of magic user, and girl. Yep, just a girl. No idea what they would have done with her, but allegedly that's what was on dock for the game. No doubt if that had actually come to pass, Link to the Past would have been a very, very different game. Once they reeled in the ideas a bit and had it fall more in line with the original game, they brought in concepts that would stay on as important themes for the rest of the series. Kakariko Village and its song would exist in future games, the Seven Sages, Zelda's Lullaby, Ganondorf as a separate entity from Ganon, Lake Hylia, and so much more. Oh, let's not forget the Kukos. Don't ever forget about the Kukos. This game would go on to be the highest rated game of its time, sweeping across the board with 9s and 10s. Some publications even named it the greatest game of all time, selling nearly 1 million units on the SNES and then a further 1.4 for the GBA. It's easy to see why. With that said, some stuff needed to be altered for the US and EU markets. The name was changed, as we talked about earlier, and some other smaller things were altered. The Sanctuary was supposed to be a Catholic Church type location, and the Wizard Aghanim was originally a priest. There were also some Egyptian hieroglyphs that were either removed or just outright replaced. As you can see, there were a ton of changes made for the game, many of which I think we can all agree were for the better. I don't know about you, but having a Final Fantasy or Secret of Mana-like party would have been a much larger departure from any other Zelda, including Zelda 2, and its weird side-scrolling action. We would see this idea a little more fleshed out in Four Sword and Four Sword Adventures, though those games were a little more narrow in scope when compared to Link to the Past, or really any other Zelda game. Oh man, gameplay. There is so much to talk about here. This game does everything the original Zelda did back in 1986, except so much better. Just like Super Metroid improved upon the original Metroid, Link to the Past executes on a much higher level than the original. It is crazy, especially since really not all too much time has realistically passed from Zelda 2 to this. The leap in not only a graphical sense, but a gameplay one is baffling. So, right off the bat, the world just feels so much better to traverse. Link can move in 8 directions. That's correct. Movement is no longer locked to the 4 directions on a D-pad. You got up, down, left, and right, but we also have diagonals. Up, left, up, right, down, left, down, right. Add to that Link attacks in a swinging arc and not just a stab. Excellent. And with the charge attack to really add on extra damage in combat, it makes it exponentially more fun and a little easier to engage with. We even have the sword beam back, but only at full hearts and only after you get the Master Sword. Every enemy is fun to fight, for the most part. And with the added combat abilities, movement, and new items to use, forget it. It is such an improvement over the 2 other games in the series. Collected items show up on the item screen, some get swapped out, others get overall just replaced, and the game has a ton of things to collect. Pieces of heart, empty bottles, flutes, wands, canes, tunic upgrades, sword upgrades, big bombs, bow and arrow upgrades, magic pendants and spells, books! Oh, and you can run. There's so much to explore and find. It's almost too much. One very welcome improvement over the original is that bombable surfaces now have this little crumble texture, and anything that be picked up and tossed has some kind of feature around it to show you as a player that something could be done there. Nothing exemplifies this more than this one area right here. It's got this open door, a bombable wall, and a giant rock to pick up and toss, all of which is telegraphed to you as the player really well. No more blind bombing a wall or trying to burn a bush with the lantern on the off chance that it's the one you either need to blow up or burn. The overworld is filled with these kinds of things. Small signals that tell the player what they could do, or at least kind of hint at it. Conveyance is the key word here. Things are there if you look for them, but you kind of have to be on the lookout for them. That said, some things demand your attention, like pieces of heart that you can just find out in the open. These two encourage exploration and a bit of puzzle solving. At one point, you need to dash into a bookcase to get this book, but did you know you could dash into just about anything and there will be some kind of reaction for it? Certain stones, bashed. Trees, bashed. Running full force at a guy, bashed. You are asked to do this one particular thing, and in doing that, the game teaches you, hey, maybe this applies to other things in the world as well. Some of the more advanced puzzles ask you to do fairly similar things, like the Ether spell. It can highlight invisible paths. Certain enemies require you to move and plan out your attacks. Gone are the days of just walking up and stabbing. Some need arrows, some need bombs, some require you to attack then move because the enemy mimics your movement. Better still, some bosses require you to attack the spell that they launch at you in some kind of high-stakes tennis match. Combat and exploration have been brought up to a whole new level, and it's the best it's ever been to this point. Let's switch it up a little bit here and take a look at the village, Kakariko. A notable downturn from Zelda 2, there's really only the one village, but it has so much more character to it than all the towns in Zelda 2 put together. The people are there, and they do provide some helpful dialogue, but more importantly, they all seem to be living their own lives as opposed to just being in a room like the original Zelda, waiting for you to tell you about bombs, or even in Zelda 2, where, yeah, they did go back and forth on the screen a little bit, but it felt kinda empty, right? Again, like NPCs are just waiting for Link to do a thing. Here in this game, the NPCs are just more alive? Human, maybe. Like this guy, for example. He had an argument with his brother and decided to go full Edgar Allan Poe on the guy and sealed him away like Fortunato. Is that good? No, this dude is insane. Is it human adjacent, though? Yeah, kinda. Did you like that? Did you like the fact that you got a cask of Amontillado reference in your Zelda retrospective? Weren't expecting that, were you? You're welcome. Besides that, the villagers have their own relationships with others. Some of the townsfolk even know you as Link. Some do favors, and some narc on you. It's a huge upgrade. That said, there are other encampments you can come across in the world. Each has a person to talk with and a hint of something to do should you choose. Another huge upgrade is the dungeon experience. Unlike the first game, where you had the option to do anything really at any time, Link to the Past is a bit more linear. I mean, you can still go to certain places out of order, and you might even be able to beat each one of those if you're clever enough, but certain dungeons do require specific items to complete them. Like Zelda 2, each dungeon has its own keys and can be multi-leveled. You can go upstairs and fall down certain gaps in the floor to go down a level. Better still, you can travel along the Z-axis in this game. If an area looks like it's higher up, like a cliff, ledge, or a second half of the room you're in, you just walk up and down stairs. There are a bunch of rooms that are like this. It opens up the possibilities for puzzles and getting into new areas. Each room has clear signs on what can be done to progress. Some dungeons even ask you to exit and find alternative routes to get back into it. Every dungeon has a unique boss fight, some involve the item you picked up, like the bow and arrows, and some just rely on your good old sword arm. Some bosses even act like kinda small puzzles on their own. It's everything the first two games wanted to be, and then some. Scattered throughout the land are some fairy fountains and other NPCs who will lend Link some help. Sword upgrades, shield upgrades, capacity increases, new tunics, or flippers to swim, and plenty of rupees to find throughout the land. Make sure you have enough cash on hand. Some of those upgrades can get kinda pricey. The capacity upgrades alone cost several hundred. One of the best upgrades, though, is this little devil guy who curses you into using half of your magic meter per item or spell used. And, oh, right, the magic meter. Like in Zelda 2, you have a magic meter to use. Anything that requires magic, spells, canes, staffs, the cloak that you can find, just to name a few, will cost some magic, which, near endgame, makes this upgrade almost essential in a way. It's important to know, though, that this is all heavily tangential. You don't really need to do any of this to beat the game. All you really need to do is just go to each dungeon and rescue the 7 maidens, then fight Ganon. But you'd be doing yourself a disservice by not trying to explore as much of Hyrule as possible. Speaking of Hyrule, actually, let's talk about the main mechanic for this game. For better or for worse, this game set into practice something that would very nearly define almost every Zelda game from here on out. We even see this in Tears of the Kingdom to a degree. Dual worlds. I'm not joking, this exists in almost every Zelda from here on out in some way, shape, or form. In this game, the Dark World, a twisted reflection of the land of Hyrule, once the Golden Land where the Triforce was kept by the gods who forged the world, now laid to waste by Ganon. This realm transforms every creature who enters it to more align with their true essence. We see this almost immediately with some of the few interactions you have in the Dark World. These guys, specifically, this bully thing and ball? Yeah, okay. Entering the Dark World can be fairly easy. Just step onto one of these pads and boom, there you are. The music changes and the world takes on a darker tone, both in sound and in terms of visualization. Once you grab a few key items though, the Moon Pearl and the Magic Mirror, Link is no longer subject to changing shape. Funny that when he does change, he turns into a rabbit though. The realm hopping is a key part in a ton of stuff to do in this game. Certain puzzles can only be solved by shifting realms. Some even involve doing that a few times. Most of these are optional, however, with exceptions on certain dungeons. Dipping back and forth isn't really needed unless you're trying to collect as much as possible. If you're in the dark world and are confused about where to go, try shifting and seeing where you are in the light world. Sometimes it might be exactly the same place. Sometimes you may end up on a higher plane or in an area all its own. If you ever feel like something is just out of reach, try ripping a hole in the fabric of space-time to get that piece of heart. No worries. Thankfully, because these are optional, they aren't all that hard to figure out. Some of them can be somewhat mild in terms of brain power to solve, but it never gets much more difficult than that. When it's used as a means to beat the game, the transition points are all but spelled out for you. If you have a pair of eyes and at least 2 working brain cells kicking around, you'll be able to beat the game pretty easily. It's still fun to do though, and it really showcases the SNES's ability to load things fairly quickly. A technical marvel of its time. So here's a fun little aside. A while back I saw a video of Link to the Past Randomizer, but not just any randomizer. One that ended up mixing it up with Super Metroid. What a trip that can be. If you have played either of those games to death, as I have, then maybe give this a shot. Getting it all to work can be a bit tedious though, it takes a lot of setup. But once you get that going, man, what a fun time that is. It's great to test your game knowledge on both of these games. Items from both games can end up in the other game. So for example, you could be running in Brinstar and then pick up the magic mirror. Or you could pop open a chest in the ice dungeon and end up with a screw attack. It really makes you check to find as many power-up locations and chests in both games. Plus it has the bonus effect of changing up how you approach the game as a whole. Give it a try if you like. I'm going to leave some resources to that down below. Check out the description if you're curious. Oh, and if you want to, you can also just randomize one of those games if for some reason the other doesn't really work with you. Have fun with it, and good luck if you choose to try the mix. As far as the story goes, we do get more of it in the pre-game text crawl, or in this case, I guess this almost PowerPoint-like presentation. It's far more involved than the original NES games, which gave you almost nothing outside of the 1-paragraph synopsis, so that's a pretty big improvement. That said, the game does a pretty good job of telling you everything you need to know right up front, and while the manual does delve a bit deeper into the overall lore of Hyrule, it isn't exactly mandatory reading. I mean, I would still read it, for the fun of it. Man, I really miss those game manuals. Just so fun to read and look at, like an appetizer for the game. It's a lost art for sure. Ah well, I digress. The manual has some more to say about the lore, and there's some pretty fun art in there as well. The land of Hyrule was created by 3 gods. The god of power bathed the land in fire and created the land and mountains. The god of wisdom created science and magic, and with that, order was brought to the land. And lastly, the god of courage created life, everything from the littlest good to the biggest, not so good, and literally everything in between. Once they wrapped up creating life and land, they left, but not before leaving a symbol of their power, the Triforce. Now, the Triforce is left in a realm, the Golden Land to be specific. There it would stay for a long time until the King of Thieves, Ganondorf Dragmire, aka Mandrag Ganon. Somehow, Ganondorf was able to break into the Golden Land and claim the Triforce for himself. Thus began the Imprisoning War. 7 wise men and the Hyrule Knights fought to keep a now transformed Ganon locked away in the Golden Land. Along with the attempt to seal the Golden Land, one sword was created to be used should the need arise. They called it the Master Sword, or the Sword of Evil's Bane. After a long battle, the sages were finally able to lock Ganon away. Now, many centuries have passed, and the current King of Hyrule has asked for aid in assessing the barrier to the once Golden Land, now referred to as the Dark World. The wizard Aghanim arrives to aid the king. Many people in the land of Hyrule say that Aghanim now controls the land, and no one has seen the king for quite some time. Waking to see her uncle, one of the last knights of Hyrule, take up the family sword and shield, he urges you to stay at home and not leave the house. But with the voice of a mysterious girl named Zelda ringing in your mind and a bad feeling involving your uncle, how could you stay at home? Alright, now we get into the story proper. Yeah, all of that? That was preamble. Hope you're ready. It's only gonna get a little more involved from here. That's also why I didn't have a skip spoilers message until now. Here, for all of you who have yet to play the game, skip to here either by using the timestamp in the description below or by jumping to whatever the time code is. And while you're doing that, hey, you're new here, why don't you hit that sub button? I'd appreciate it. Maybe give it a like too while you're at it. For all of you guys that have already done all that, subbed up, and usually are the ones that leave comments below, thank you. I appreciate it. It's been nice to get to know you some, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say after this. Let's give that a bit. Perfect. Let's continue. So, we take up the pink, purple-haired hero? I don't know why the sprite has that coloration. Link looks nothing like that in the art in the manuals. Whatever. It's cool. It's a pretty good look. We take control of Link and immediately leave the house. We make a beeline for the castle. That's where the message we receive from Zelda says to go. After finding the secret entrance in the bushes, we wind up in the basement levels in the castle where we find our uncle. He doesn't look all that great. After some parting words, we take up the sword and shield, and after a bit of searching, we find the prison cells where Zelda is being kept. After the jailbreak, we bring Zelda to a literal sanctuary. Along the way, we get told a bunch of stuff. Zelda is the princess of Hyrule. Aghanim is an evil wizard, who would have thought, and he's trying to break the seal on the Dark World by sacrificing the descendants of the sages, who, for some reason, are all maidens. He has nearly succeeded in breaking the seal. Zelda is the last one. With Zelda safe and armed with some guidance to head to Kakariko Village and find the Elder, we begin our adventure for real this time. The Elder, Sarasahala, alright, that's a name, fled the village and is near an old temple. Once you finally meet up with Sarasahala, he tells you more about the situation and about some items that will help. To test you, he sends you into the Temple of Courage to get the Pendant of Courage. After you best the dungeon and get the pendant and bring it to him, he asks you to go get the other two, Wisdom and Power. The hunt continues. Each dungeon asks you to do a few things to enter. One requires a book, and the other asks you to traverse literal realms. These do a lot to teach you the ins and outs of the game. Some puzzles will require more from you as a player, and you will need certain items to be able to continue. Some puzzles will require some outside the realm thinking. Once you get all three pendants, and after talking with Sarasahala, he gives you one last task. Go to the Lost Woods and claim the Sword of Evil's Bane, the Master Sword. With all three pendants in hand, Link is able to draw the sword from its resting place. After he does, he gets a telepathic message from Zelda. Aghanim found her and has taken her back to the castle to complete the ritual. Link wastes no time in going back to the castle to confront the wizard. He arrives too late though. Zelda gets zapped right in front of him, and the barrier between realms is lost. Aghanim and Link fight, with Link dealing the final blow as he gets teleported to the Dark World. It's at this point that we get a ton more to do. Several dungeons are made available, and each one has a maiden to save. A few of the dungeons in the Dark World are in some pretty familiar places. Some involve monkeys. Explore the Dark World and get all the upgrades it can. Pieces of heart, couple bottles. The quest is urgent, but do make sure to take some time to do some of the optional stuff. It's going to be important later. The game opens up massively at this point. And with the Master Sword in hand, with each maiden saved, the world repairs itself little by little. Dungeon after dungeon, and rescue after rescue, Link proves to be the hero worthy of that title. Eventually you get to the last dungeon and face off against Aghanim? 3 of them. No, that's Ganon. The fight is a long and difficult one. Eventually, Ganon flees. Link gives chase, and they have a climactic battle in the pyramid. After a long fight, Link proves to be too much for Ganon, and with the King of Thieves dead and gone, Link lays claim to the Triforce and repairs not only his world, but he restores the Dark World back to its original form, the Golden Land. The credits roll, and we see Link with his uncle. The king is back to life, and Zelda continues her duties as the princess. The hero of Hyrule is celebrated throughout the land. Job well done. For now, anyway. Hey, welcome back everybody who jumped ahead just a bit, and everybody else, thanks for sticking with it. Now let's wrap this up, shall we? This game is so good. It's just so damn good.
Is it the best Zelda game? I don't know, maybe. That can be very personal to the people playing it. I know for me it sits pretty high up on my list of favorites, but it's not the one I played the most as a kid, or even now really. But man, was that a good time. Objectively, it's just a great game. It paved the way forward for just about every other game in the series, established a formula, for better or for worse, and it still gets called back to in every modern rendition of a 2D Zelda, let alone the games it inspired from other studios. Much like how Metroid and Super Metroid laid out the foundation of the Metroidvania, or I guess 2D action platformer, so too did Link to the Past, progenitor of its gameplay. It would inspire many indie studios, as well as some of the bigger ones, to try and make their own version of the game. Some made near beat-for-beat copies, and some took a vastly different approach, but they can all find their origin somewhere around here. With no other games on the Super Nintendo that really held the Zelda name, we would have to look elsewhere. Much like Mario and Samus before him, Link would find himself on a portable platform before too long, for 3 games in total: Link's Awakening and 2 Oracle games, ranging on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, all of which we'll be taking a look at next time when the Zelda Retrospective continues. As for Zelda's next big epic home console release, well, that's a little further out. It's gonna take some time. Join me next time when we adventure to a new land where dreams and reality mix. I'll see you then. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the end card. At last, the first leg of Zelda is down and in the books. And what a game to end on, huh? Like I was saying, the next games are going to be the handheld ones on the Game Boy, so, prep for that. In the meantime, I got some reverse Castlevania in the works, and that's coming up next. If you want to see me play that stuff live, you can catch it here either on YouTube or on Twitch, whichever you prefer. I look forward to seeing you there. For now, take it easy, and I'll catch you later.